My name is Haley Sullivan, and at 34, I've built a life that looks perfect on paper: senior investment advisor at a prestigious Chicago firm, lakefront condo, and financial security my ancestors could only dream of. Meanwhile, back in Napa Valley, my family's three-generation vineyard is quietly crumbling under my younger brother Jason's management. For years, I've watched from a distance as my parents enabled their golden child, dismissing my concerns with practiced ease. Then came the desperate phone call that would force me to choose between my hard-earned money and a family legacy drowning in debt. If you've ever been the responsible sibling who's expected to clean up everyone else's mess, drop a like and subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to where this all began. Sullivan Family Vineyards wasn't always a source of family tension. Growing up among the sun-drenched hills of Napa Valley, I remember the vineyard as a magical place. Our grandfather, Patrick Sullivan, immigrated from Ireland in 1952 with nothing but $20 and a knowledge of soil that bordered on mystical. He worked the fields of other wineries for 15 years before scraping together enough to purchase 30 acres of what seasoned vintners considered marginal land. The best grapes come from vines that have to struggle a little, he would tell me as we walked the rows during my childhood. His calloused hands would cup a cluster of grapes, examining them with the reverence of a jeweler inspecting diamonds. Those marginal 30 acres proved the skeptics wrong when Sullivan Wines began winning regional awards in the 1970s. My father, Frank Sullivan, expanded the operation to 85 acres after taking over from Grandpa Patrick. Under my parents' stewardship, Sullivan Wines gained national distribution and a reputation for reliable excellence. Not the most prestigious label in Napa, but respected for consistent quality and fair pricing. My mother Diana, with her marketing background, created the tasting room experience that became our vineyard's signature: unpretentious, educational, and genuinely warm. Wine is about connection, she'd say, not intimidation. Tourists and wine enthusiasts alike appreciated her approach, and many became loyal customers who returned year after year. This was the world Jason and I grew up in, a family business built on hard work, integrity, and connection to the land. But even in those early years, the difference in how we were treated was obvious. Jason is 3 years younger than me, and from his birth, there was something about him that made people smile. With his Sullivan blue eyes and easy charm, he could talk his way out of trouble before he could properly tie his shoes. When Jason knocked over a display of wine bottles at age 7, my parents laughed about his exuberance. When I accidentally broke a single glass at age 10, I was lectured about carefulness and responsibility. "You're the oldest, Haley," became the explanation for every double standard. "You need to set an example." By the time I was 14, I was working weekends in the tasting room, learning bookkeeping from my mother, and expected to maintain straight A's. Meanwhile, Jason's mediocre grades were dismissed because he's just more creative, and his chores often went unfinished because he got distracted by a new idea. Don't misunderstand, my parents loved me. They were good people who genuinely believed they were raising us both well. But their blindness to their favoritism created wounds that deepened over time. My interest in finance emerged partly from necessity. Someone had to understand the business side of winemaking, and it clearly wasn't going to be Jason. While he was allowed to focus on the romantic aspects of viticulture, the blending, the tasting, the storytelling, I gravitated toward spreadsheets, market trends, and investment strategies. "You have your grandfather's head for numbers," my father would say proudly, not realizing he was simultaneously pigeonholing me while giving Jason freedom to explore all aspects of the business. High school further solidified our roles. I joined business clubs, tutored other students, and worked in the vineyard office. Jason played sports, joined theater, and charmed his teachers into extending deadlines. When college application time came, I researched scholarships and financial aid options, knowing the vineyard's profits were being reinvested in expansion. "We'll help however we can," my parents said, which translated to covering my textbooks while I worked part-time jobs to manage the rest. After earning my acceptance to Northwestern University's business program, I expected similar expectations for Jason. Instead, when he decided to attend an expensive private college to study creative entrepreneurship, my parents liquidated investments to cover his tuition. He dropped out after 3 semesters, claiming the program stifled his creativity. 6 months later, they funded his enrollment at another expensive school, which lasted barely a year. The pattern continued through our 20s. After business school, I took a position with a financial advisory firm in Chicago despite my parents' disappointment that I wasn't coming home to the Vineyard. "We always thought you'd bring your business skills back here," my mother said during that difficult conversation. "The Vineyard doesn't need 2 generations managing it simultaneously," I replied carefully. "And I need to build my own path." What I didn't say. I needed space from the family dynamic that consistently prioritized Jason's whims over my contributions. Over the next 12 years, I built my career from junior advisor to senior investment consultant. My client portfolio grew to include several high-net-worth individuals and family offices, and my compensation reflected my success. I limited my visits home to major holidays and called weekly, maintaining connections while protecting my independence. Meanwhile, Jason bounced between various ventures: a cold-pressed juice bar that lasted 8 months, an app development project that never launched, a sustainable clothing line that produced exactly 2 prototype garments. Each failure was cushioned by parental support, both financial and emotional. "He's finding his way," they'd say. "At least he's trying new things." 5 years ago, my father's back problems worsened, requiring surgery and a lengthy recovery. At 58, he began talking about stepping back from day-to-day vineyard operations. I expected they might hire an experienced manager or perhaps reach out to me about a potential role. Instead, during Christmas dinner, they announced that Jason would be taking over as the vineyard's general manager. "It's perfect timing," my mother beamed. "Jason's ready for a real challenge, and he has so many wonderful ideas for modernizing operations." Jason, then 29, had exactly 0 formal business education and had never held a job longer than a year. His knowledge of winemaking came from growing up around it, not from dedicated study or apprenticeship. But when I carefully raised these points, my concerns were waved away. "Book learning isn't everything, Haley," my father said. "Jason has instincts for this business. And he'll have us to guide him." Looking at Jason's confident smile across the table, I recognized a familiar pattern and decided to keep further concerns to myself. I returned to Chicago after the holidays with a sense of foreboding that I tried to dismiss as ungenerous. Unfortunately, that foreboding would prove prophetic in ways even I couldn't have imagined. Jason approached running the Vineyard the same way he approached everything else in life, with boundless confidence unchecked by experience or expertise. Within 3 months of taking over, he presented my parents with what he called his Vision 2025 plan for Sullivan Family Vineyards. "We need to position ourselves as the next generation boutique winery," he explained during a video call that included me at my parents' insistence. "The old model of steady growth and consistent products is outdated. Today's wine market is about exclusivity, story, and experience." His presentation was slick and persuasive. He proposed investing in state-of-the-art production equipment, developing limited-edition micro-batches with higher price points, renovating the tasting room into a multi-sensory journey, and expanding their digital presence through influencer partnerships. When I asked about the financial projections behind these initiatives, Jason had ready answers that sounded impressive but lacked substantive analysis. "The equipment pays for itself in 3 years through increased efficiency," he claimed, without any data on current inefficiencies or realistic productivity improvements. "The luxury market segment is growing at 18% annually," he stated, without contextualizing how that applied specifically to our price point or region. My parents were enchanted. My father, never comfortable with the business side, seemed relieved to hand these decisions to someone who spoke with such certainty. My mother, always proud of Jason's creativity, saw this as validation of their parenting choices. I tried one last attempt at caution. "These sound like interesting ideas, but maybe phase them in gradually? Start with one initiative, measure results, then expand?" Jason's response was telling. "That's such a typical risk-averse financial perspective. No offense, Haley, but disruption requires bold moves." Half measures just mean getting left behind. My parents nodded along, and I recognized the futility of further discussion. Over the next 2 years, Jason implemented his vision with predictable results. The first red flags appeared in trade publications. Where Sullivan wines had once received consistent ratings in the 88 to 91 point range, respectable scores for our price category, newer vintages dropped to 83 to 85 points, with critics noting inconsistent quality and confused identity. Local suppliers began contacting my parents directly about overdue invoices. Jason dismissed these as administrative backlogs due to our systems upgrade. The systems upgrade was an expensive proprietary software package that none of the existing staff had been properly trained to use. The staff itself underwent dramatic changes. Longtime employees, including our vineyard manager who had been with us for 20 years, were gradually replaced by Jason's friends from his college and entrepreneurial circles. The new marketing director had previously run social media for Jason's failed clothing line. The new hospitality manager was his former roommate whose primary qualification was having once visited wineries in France. These new hires commanded salaries well above industry standards for our region and production volume. When my mother gently questioned this, Jason insisted that top talent requires top compensation and that traditional salary benchmarks don't apply to disruptors. Meanwhile, he was taking out loans against the vineyard's assets. Some funded necessary operations as cash flow tightened, but others supported his grander visions, a line of wine-infused spirits that never made it past development, a virtual reality vineyard tour that consumed thousands in development costs before being abandoned. During my visits home, I noticed the physical decline of the property. Maintenance on the equipment barn had been deferred. The landscaping around the tasting room, once immaculate, now showed signs of neglect. Even the family home had a slightly worn appearance, with repairs clearly postponed. When I raised these observations, my parents became defensive. The wine business has changed dramatically, my father would say. Margins are tighter for everyone. Jason is focusing on strategic priorities, my mother would add. Cosmetic issues can wait. But it wasn't just cosmetic. During my visit last Christmas, I noticed fewer workers in the fields. The atmosphere in the tasting room was subdued rather than bustling. My parents looked tired, with new worry lines etching their faces despite their upbeat conversation. When I tried to discuss business over dinner, they redirected to safer topics, my work in Chicago, local Napa gossip, politics, anything but the vineyard's operations. Jason himself made only brief appearances during my 5-day stay, citing meetings with potential investors and distribution partners. When pressed for details, his answers were vague but delivered with unwavering confidence. I returned to Chicago concerned but still not grasping the full extent of the situation. My parents were adults who had run a successful business for decades. Surely they wouldn't let things get truly dire. Then, 3 months after my Christmas visit, my phone rang with my mother's number. Her voice, usually warm and composed, trembled slightly. "Haley, sweetheart, do you have some time to talk? We need to discuss the vineyard situation." The word situation sent a chill through me. In our family's understated communication style, it signaled something far more serious than a minor setback. "Of course, Mom," I replied, already dreading what I was about to learn. "Tell me everything." "It's just a temporary cash flow issue," my mother began, her voice carrying the forced lightness I recognized from childhood discussions about tight months during the vineyard's early years. "What kind of cash flow issue?" I asked, putting my phone on speaker as I pulled out a notebook. Years of financial advisory work had taught me to document important conversations, especially when they involved money. "Well, we have some payments coming due, and our receivables are delayed." She paused. "Your father and I thought perhaps you might have some insights, given your financial expertise." This circumspect approach was frustrating but typical. My family rarely addressed problems directly. "Mom, I need specific numbers and timelines to offer any useful advice," I said, keeping my tone gentle but firm. "What exactly are we talking about here?" There was a muffled conversation, then my father came on the line. "Haley, it's Dad. Look, we're in a bit of a bind. Some of Jason's initiatives haven't panned out as quickly as projected, and we've got a significant loan payment due at the end of the month." "How significant?" A long pause. $100,000. I nearly dropped my pen. 100,000, Dad, that's not a minor cash flow issue. What happens if you can't make that payment? The loan is secured against the North Vineyard parcel. If we default, foreclosure proceedings would begin. The North parcel was our oldest and most productive land, 25 acres that produced our flagship Cabernet. Losing it would effectively end Sullivan Vineyards as a viable operation. How did it get to this point? I asked, struggling to keep accusation from my voice. When I asked at Christmas, you both said things were tight but manageable. We thought they were, my mother interjected, back on the call. Jason had assured us that several big deals were about to close. A distribution arrangement with a luxury hotel chain, an export opportunity to Asia. And those deals fell through? Another uncomfortable silence. They weren't as solid as Jason had presented them, my father finally admitted. Over the next hour, the full picture emerged, and it was far worse than I'd imagined. The vineyard wasn't just facing one missed loan payment, it was drowning in debt from multiple sources. $875,000 in outstanding loans across 3 different lenders. Nearly $140,000 in unpaid vendor invoices. 3 years of property tax payments behind schedule, with penalties accumulating. Equipment leases in default, with some machinery already repossessed. Production down almost 40% from 5 years earlier. Multiple premium clients lost due to quality and delivery issues. The most shocking revelation was that my parents had been largely unaware of the severity until recently. Jason had been intercepting creditor notices, giving my parents edited versions of financial statements, and assuring them that temporary setbacks were just part of his disruption strategy. "When did you discover the actual situation?" I asked. "Last month," my mother said quietly. "One of our suppliers, Thomas Wilson, you remember him, came to the house personally instead of calling the office. He said he hated to do it, but he couldn't extend any more credit without some payment on what we already owed. We had no idea we were behind with him. When we started looking deeper, we found everything," my father finished for her. When confronted, Jason had a ready explanation for each issue. The market had shifted unexpectedly. 2 consecutive years of unusual weather had affected production. Key staff had failed to execute his vision properly. The old guard of the wine industry was resistant to innovation. With just a little more time and capital, his strategies would prove successful. "And you believe him?" I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. "He's made mistakes," my father acknowledged. "But his heart is in the right place. He loves the vineyard, Haley." "Love doesn't pay creditors," I pointed out. "What's your plan now?" The ensuing silence told me everything. They didn't have a plan, they had a hope, and that hope was me. "Haley," my mother finally said, "we know you've done very well in Chicago. Your father and I wouldn't ask if there were any other options. But is there any way you could help with this immediate payment? Just to give us time to restructure everything else? You want me to give you $100,000? I clarified, my stomach tightening. "Loan," my father corrected quickly. "We're asking for a loan, with proper documentation and interest. This is business, not a handout." But we all knew that wasn't entirely true. In my parents' minds, this request was inseparable from family obligation. "It's your heritage too, Haley," my mother added softly. "The vineyard would eventually pass to both you and Jason. We're just trying to ensure there's something left to pass down." The irony was painful. For years, the vineyard had been presented as Jason's domain, his birthright, with my financial career cast as a departure from family tradition rather than a contribution to it. Now, suddenly, my connection to that heritage was being emphasized because it served a purpose. I need to think about this, I said finally. I'll need to see complete financial records, current contracts, all outstanding obligations. If I'm considering this kind of investment, I need to understand exactly what I'm getting into. Of course, my father agreed quickly. We'll send everything. And Haley? Thank you for even considering this. Family needs to stick together through tough times. After ending the call, I sat motionless at my desk, staring at the notes I'd taken. The vineyard that had been my childhood home, the business my grandfather had built from nothing, was on the brink of collapse due to mismanagement and enabling. And now I was being asked to use my hard-earned savings to bail them out. The rational financial advisor in me knew the answer should be an immediate no. The daughter in me couldn't dismiss the request so easily. I closed my notebook, knowing sleep would be impossible that night. That evening, I did what I always do when facing a complex problem. I created a spreadsheet. 2 columns, reasons to help, reasons to refuse. But the analytical approach that served me so well professionally failed to capture the emotional complexity of the situation. How do you quantify a childhood home? What's the ROI calculation on family loyalty? What's the depreciation schedule on a legacy? After 3 frustrating hours, I called my friend and colleague Megan Kim for perspective. As a fellow financial advisor with no emotional stake in my family dynamics, she could offer the objectivity I sorely needed. Let me get this straight, she said after I explained the situation. Your brother ran the business into the ground, your parents enabled him every step of the way, and now they want you to use your savings to bail them out? That's the situation, I confirmed. And if you provide this money, who would be managing it? I hesitated. They didn't specify, but presumably the current management would continue. By current management, you mean your brother, who created this disaster in the first place? When she put it that way, the answer seemed obvious. Haley, Megan continued more gently, you know what advice you'd give to a client in this situation. It's throwing good money after bad. Without fundamental changes in management and accountability, you're just delaying the inevitable collapse while depleting your own financial security. She was right, of course. But clients don't have childhood memories of picking grapes with their grandfather under the California sun. Clients don't hear their mother's voice cracking with desperation over the phone. I need to see the situation for myself, I decided aloud. Before I make any decision, I need first-hand information. The next morning, I requested emergency personal leave from work, booked a flight to San Francisco, and rented a car for the drive to Napa Valley. I notified my parents I was coming but asked them not to tell Jason immediately. I needed to observe the vineyard's operations without preparations or performances. The drive from San Francisco to Napa Valley normally fills me with anticipation, the gradually changing landscape, rolling hills replacing urban sprawl, the first glimpse of orderly vineyard rows. This time, anxiety overshadowed appreciation. Sullivan Family Vineyard sits at the end of a long driveway marked by a modest wooden sign bearing our family name and established date. As I turned onto the gravel drive, the contrast with my childhood memories was jarring. The entrance gardens, once meticulously maintained to welcome visitors, were overgrown. The white fencing along the property line needed painting. Even the sign itself hung slightly askew. The tasting room parking lot, which should have been busy on a Friday afternoon, held only 3 cars. Inside, a young woman I didn't recognize stood behind the counter, scrolling on her phone. She looked up with visible disinterest as I entered. We're about to close for a private event, she said, though no preparations for any event were visible. I'm Haley Sullivan, I introduced myself. The owner's daughter. Her demeanor shifted instantly. Oh. Sorry, nobody mentioned you were coming. I'm Brittany, the tasting room manager. Jason hired me last year. Is my brother here today? He had meetings in town, she replied vaguely. Should be back later. I thanked her and continued my self-guided inspection of the property. The production facility revealed further neglect, equipment gathering dust, stacks of unlabeled boxes, an emptiness that suggested significantly reduced operations. A single worker was visible, organizing bottles with headphones on. The administrative office was unlocked but unoccupied. Papers cluttered every surface, many bearing red past due stamps or final notice headers. I began sorting through them systematically, creating organized piles by vendor, amount, and urgency. The picture they painted was even worse than my parents had described. While examining bank statements, I noticed recurring transfers to an account I didn't recognize, $5,000 to $8,000 monthly labeled only as JPS Consulting. After checking several statements, these transfers totaled nearly $180,000 over 2 years. As I was photographing these documents, the office door opened. Thomas Wilson, our longtime production manager and the supplier who had alerted my parents to the financial problems, stood in the doorway with surprise evident on his weathered face. "Haley? No one mentioned you were visiting." I stood and embraced him. Thomas had worked with my grandfather and had always been kind to me as a child, explaining fermentation processes and letting me help during harvest. "It wasn't announced," I explained. "I'm trying to understand what's happening with the vineyard." His expression sobered. "About time someone did. It's been difficult to watch." Over the next hour, Thomas provided the unvarnished truth from an insider's perspective. Jason had systematically sidelined experienced staff while bringing in friends at inflated salaries. Traditional winemaking practices that had secured our reputation were abandoned for trendy techniques without proper testing. Equipment purchases were made based on flashiness rather than functionality. We tried to advise him, but he dismissed decades of experience as outdated thinking, Thomas explained. When people persisted, they found their responsibilities reduced or were pushed out entirely. He retrieved a file from his truck containing documentation of warnings he'd sent to both Jason and my parents over the past 3 years, production issues, quality concerns, financial recommendations, most acknowledged but never addressed. "Why did you stay?" I asked. He looked out the window toward the vineyards. "Your grandfather gave me my start when no one else would. This land, it deserves better than what's happening to it." As evening approached, I went to my parents' house. They greeted me with a mixture of relief and apprehension, clearly uncertain whether I came as savior or judge. Over dinner, I asked careful questions about their understanding of the vineyard's operations. Their answers revealed a disturbing pattern of willful ignorance. Financial reports were accepted without verification. Jason's explanations for problems were taken at face value. Warning signs were rationalized away. "We should have asked more questions," my father finally admitted. But Jason was so confident, and questioning him seemed like we didn't trust him. "Trust needs to be earned," I pointed out. "Especially with business matters." As we were clearing dishes, the front door slammed open, and Jason strode in. At 31, my brother still possessed the charismatic energy that had always drawn people to him. But now I could see the strain beneath his practiced smile, the slight dishevelment in his usually impeccable appearance. "Family reunion and nobody told me," he said with forced lightness. "What brings the Chicago financial genius home?" "Mom and Dad called me about the vineyard situation," I replied evenly. His expression flickered briefly before reasserting control. "Ah, the cavalry arrives. Come to lecture us about fiscal responsibility?" "Actually, I came to understand what's happening before making any decisions." "Decisions?" His eyes narrowed. "What decisions would you be making about our family business from Chicago?" "The decision about whether to provide the $100,000 Mom and Dad asked for," I stated plainly. Jason's expression cycled rapidly through surprise, calculation, and finally a practiced openness. "They mentioned they might approach you for temporary assistance." "Glad you're considering it. We're dealing with a short-term liquidity issue while several major initiatives mature." "Like the hotel chain distribution deal that fell through?" I asked. "Or the Asian export opportunity that didn't materialize?" His confidence wavered momentarily before recovering. "Business development involves setbacks. Not something you'd understand from the safety of wealth management." What's JPS Consulting, Jason? The question clearly caught him off guard. A necessary strategic advisory service. JPS, Jason Patrick Sullivan, I clarified. You've been transferring Vineyard funds to your personal consulting company while the business fails to pay its actual vendors? That's a gross mischaracterization, he snapped, color rising in his face. I've poured everything into this Vineyard's transformation. If I've taken any compensation, it's a fraction of my market value. Your market value should be determined by results, not self-assessment, I countered. The conversation deteriorated from there. Jason alternated between defensive justifications, attacks on my lack of involvement, and eventually emotional appeals about family loyalty. When those tactics failed, he shifted to entitlement. You can easily afford to help, he argued. With your salary and bonuses, $100,000 is what, 2 months' income? Meanwhile, I've dedicated years to this place. Dedication without competence isn't a virtue, I responded, my patience finally breaking. And my financial status isn't relevant to your mismanagement. He stormed out after that, but not before mentioning his newest venture idea, wine-infused craft cocktails that would revolutionize the beverage industry, that he planned to launch once this temporary situation is resolved. Late that night, I sat in the Vineyard office reviewing years of financial records, board meeting minutes, correspondence, and contracts. The more complete picture emerged, the clearer the path forward became, though I knew my family wouldn't like what I had to say. The next morning, I called a family meeting in the Vineyard's conference room. I arrived early to prepare, setting up my laptop and organizing documents I'd need for reference. My parents entered together, looking apprehensive. Jason arrived 15 minutes late, coffee in hand, projecting casual confidence despite the tension in the room. I appreciate everyone making time for this discussion, I began formally. After reviewing the Vineyard's financial and operational status, I've completed a comprehensive assessment that will inform my decision about the requested financial assistance. I started my presentation with the facts, no judgments or accusations, just numbers and documentation projected on the wall screen. Complete financial statements showing the deterioration over 5 years. Loan documents revealing accumulated debt and collateralized assets. Expense reports highlighting wasteful spending and questionable allocations. Production data demonstrating declining output and quality metrics. Customer feedback showing lost accounts and damaged relationships. Market analysis comparing Sullivan performance against regional benchmarks. As the data accumulated, my parents' expressions shifted from defensive to shocked. They had known things were bad, but seeing the complete picture systematically presented made the situation undeniable. Jason maintained his composure longer, occasionally interjecting with contextual explanations or industry factors beyond his control. The industry challenges affected everyone, he argued when I showed market comparison slides. You can't blame leadership for broader market forces. The regional index shows an average production decline of 7% over this period, I countered. Sullivan's production dropped 38%. Other vineyards faced identical market conditions without comparable losses. When I reached the section on personal expenditures, including Jason's consulting fees, the new truck purchased 6 months ago, and a boat registered to him but paid for with Vineyard funds, his demeanor changed dramatically. This is character assassination, he interrupted, standing abruptly. You've always resented my position here. Now you're using this temporary setback to undermine me with selective evidence and out-of-context transactions. These are the Vineyard's own financial records, I replied calmly. Nothing has been altered or misrepresented. What's your point with all this? He demanded. If you're not going to help, just say so instead of this performative audit. I'm establishing the current reality before discussing solutions, I explained. And the reality is this, even with a $100,000 infusion, the Vineyard would likely face bankruptcy within 6 months under current management practices. That statement hung in the air for several seconds before my mother broke the silence. 6 months? But Jason said if we could just get past this immediate payment. The upcoming loan payment is merely the most urgent of several critical financial obligations, I clarified. Without fundamental operational changes, another crisis would emerge almost immediately. I turned to the final slide, a simple two-option proposal. Based on my analysis, I'm prepared to offer the following options. Option 1, I will provide $200,000 capital investment, double the requested amount, in exchange for 51% controlling interest in Sullivan Family Vineyards. This would include complete restructuring of management, with Jason removed from operational decisions. I would implement a 3-year recovery plan with quarterly benchmarks, working with industry consultants to restore viability. Option 2. I will provide no direct financial assistance but will help negotiate a controlled bankruptcy, potentially preserving family ownership of the primary residence while liquidating business assets to satisfy creditors. This would include professional guidance to minimize tax consequences and protect personal assets where legally possible. The room erupted. Jason leapt to his feet, face flushed with anger. "This is a hostile takeover," he shouted. "You've been waiting for this opportunity for years, haven't you? Swooping in to steal my position when we hit a rough patch?" My mother was equally distressed, though less combative. "Haley, this isn't what we asked for. We just need help with this immediate payment, not this ultimatum." My father sat silently, eyes fixed on the table. "This isn't an ultimatum," I corrected. "It's a business decision based on financial reality. The vineyard needs far more than $100,000, it needs new management and accountability." "And naturally you believe you're the one to provide that?" Jason sneered. "From Chicago? With zero wine industry experience? I would hire experienced industry professionals to manage daily operations," I explained. "My role would focus on financial oversight and governance." "So I'm just erased?" His voice cracked slightly, the first genuine emotion showing through his defensive facade. "After everything I put into this place?" "What you put in is failure and debt," I said, more harshly than intended. "The results speak for themselves." My mother turned to my father imploringly. "Frank, say something." My father finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "What would happen to Jason under your proposal?" "He could remain as a brand ambassador, focusing on customer relationships and storytelling, areas that align with his natural strengths," I answered. "But without financial or operational authority." "A figurehead," Jason translated bitterly. "A performing monkey for tourists." "Better than bankruptcy," I countered. "Mom, Dad, you can't seriously be considering this?" Jason appealed. "She's using your temporary vulnerability to seize control of our family legacy. If we just had a little more time." "We don't have more time," I interrupted, turning to our parents. "The choice is simple: professional management with a chance of survival, or continued failure ending in total loss." The argument intensified from there. My mother accused me of coldness and opportunism. Jason alternated between rage and emotional manipulation, bringing up childhood memories and family obligations. My father remained largely silent, a worrying sign. When it became clear we were talking in circles, I gathered my materials. I presented the options based on financial reality. "I'm staying at the Valley Inn. You have until tomorrow evening to decide." As I reached the door, my mother called after me, "This is still a family, Haley, not just a business." I paused without turning. "Exactly. And sometimes family means making hard choices when others won't." At the hotel that night, I questioned my approach. Had I been too harsh? Too transactional? My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Jason, alternating between angry accusations and desperate appeals. I silenced notifications and tried to sleep. Around midnight, my phone rang, Jason again. Against better judgment, I answered. His voice was slurred, clearly intoxicated. "You always thought you were better than me, didn't you? The responsible one. The smart one. Does it feel good finally having Mom and Dad seeing me as the failure you always knew I was?" "Jason, you're drunk." We can talk tomorrow when you're sober. No, let's talk now about how you've been waiting for me to fail. How you've secretly enjoyed watching from Chicago as I struggled here. That's not true. I wanted you to succeed. He laughed bitterly. Sure you did. That's why you're swooping in to take everything the minute you have leverage. I'm trying to save the vineyard, I insisted. You're trying to take what should have been mine, he countered. Dad always said this place would be mine someday. Always. Even when you were better with the books, even when you got better grades, he promised me. And now you're stealing it because I hit a rough patch. The raw pain in his voice was difficult to hear, but his words revealed the core of our family dysfunction, the promises made, the expectations set, the roles assigned without regard for actual abilities or interests. Get some sleep, Jason, I said finally. We'll talk tomorrow. I hung up as he began another tirade, then turned off my phone completely. The next morning, I took a long walk through downtown Napa, giving my family space to discuss options privately. When I returned to my hotel room and turned my phone back on, I had a simple text from my father, "Can we meet?" Just us. Vineyard office, 1 p.m. I arrived to find him alone, sitting with a stack of old photo albums. He looked older than his 63 years, the strain of recent events evident in new lines on his face. Your mother's at her sister's, he explained. Jason. I'm not sure where he went after last night. He gestured to the chair across from him. As I sat, he opened one of the albums to a photo of my grandfather standing beside the original Sullivan Vineyard sign, proudly holding a cluster of grapes. My father didn't know anything about wine when he bought this land, he said quietly. He knew soil and hard work. The rest he learned through mistakes and persistence. He turned pages slowly, showing the vineyard's evolution, first plantings, early harvests, construction of the production facility, family photos interspersed throughout. I always thought the vineyard would unite our family through generations, he continued. Instead, it's become the thing tearing us apart. It doesn't have to, I offered. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. What would your plan look like, Haley? If we accepted your first offer? My father listened intently as I outlined the recovery strategy I'd developed overnight. I'd prepared for arguments and emotional appeals, not this quiet attention. The first priority would be debt consolidation, I explained. Many of these loans have predatory terms that are bleeding the vineyard dry. I have banking connections who could help refinance at more favorable rates, extending payment timelines while we rebuild cash flow. He nodded, asking occasional clarifying questions but mostly absorbing the information. The next step would be operational restructuring. We'd need to bring back experienced wine industry professionals to restore production quality and efficiency. I'd want to rehire Thomas in an expanded role, and recruit a seasoned vineyard manager. Thomas never wanted to leave, my father commented. Jason said he resigned, but I suspected otherwise. This confirmed my suspicions about how many staff departures had been characterized. I continued outlining key components. Asset assessment and potential sale of non-essential equipment. Cost reduction measures without compromising wine quality. Rebuilding relationships with distributors and premium clients. Revitalizing the tasting room experience based on our original philosophy. Realistic budgeting with transparent reporting and accountability measures. Your mother needs to hear this too, my father said finally. And we should do this at the house, not the office. 2 hours later, my mother joined us at the family dining table. Her initial coldness thawed as I walked through the revival strategy, focusing on preserving the Sullivan legacy rather than assigning blame. This plan. It's detailed, practical, she acknowledged reluctantly. But what about Jason? He's still your brother, our son. I've given that considerable thought, I replied. Jason has genuine talents, he's charismatic, creative, and understands the romantic aspects of winemaking that appeal to consumers. I'd propose a role as brand ambassador, focusing on storytelling, special events, and customer relationship building, without financial authority. He'll see it as a demotion, my mother worried. It is a demotion, I confirmed gently. But it's also an opportunity to contribute in ways aligned with his actual strengths rather than failing at responsibilities beyond his experience or interest. My father, who had been quietly contemplative throughout, finally spoke. We've done him no favors by setting him up to fail, Diana. Maybe we've been showing love in ways that ultimately hurt him. My mother's eyes welled with tears. We never meant to. I know, he assured her, reaching for her hand. But good intentions don't change outcomes. They exchanged a long look that seemed to contain decades of unspoken communication before my mother nodded slightly. What are your non-negotiables, Haley? My father asked, turning back to me. Complete financial transparency. Professional management. Jason removed from operational and financial decisions. My authority on major strategic directions until the vineyard returns to profitability. And if we agree, you'll provide the funds for the immediate loan payment plus additional working capital? Yes. Properly documented as an investment, not a gift or unsecured loan. My father took a deep breath. We need to talk to Jason. Finding Jason proved challenging. He wasn't answering calls or texts from any of us. Eventually, a friend reported he was staying at their guest house, refusing visitors. My father wrote a letter explaining their decision and the reasons behind it, asking Jason to meet with all of us. 2 days later, Jason finally appeared at the family home. The confrontation was every bit as difficult as expected. So you've all decided, he said upon entering, taking in our solemn expressions. The golden daughter wins again. This isn't about winning, my father replied firmly. It's about saving what 3 generations have built. Jason paced the room as we explained the new arrangement. His initial anger gave way to bargaining. What if he accepted oversight but maintained some operational control? What if we tried his approach for 6 more months with better accounting practices? What if he brought in his own investors instead? When those avenues closed, he shifted to threats. He'd contest any ownership changes legally. He'd tell everyone in the valley how his family had betrayed him. He'd start a competing vineyard and poach our remaining customers. Finally, as the reality sank in that our decision was final, he collapsed onto the couch, the bluster draining away. What am I supposed to do now? He asked, suddenly looking younger and vulnerable. This was supposed to be my legacy. It still can be, I said carefully. But legacies are earned through successful stewardship, not bestowed automatically. The brand ambassador role I proposed would let you represent Sullivan Wines to the world, the part you're actually good at. While you control everything from Chicago, he scoffed. No, I corrected. I'd be relocating here for at least the first year of transition. This isn't a remote takeover, it's a family recommitment to success. This clearly surprised him. You'd leave your big-shot financial career? I've arranged a 1-year sabbatical with the option for remote consulting, I explained. My firm has been understanding about the family emergency. This revelation shifted something in Jason. Not acceptance exactly, but perhaps the first glimmer that this change wasn't solely about punishing him or taking what he viewed as rightfully his. Implementation began immediately. The first difficult decisions came rapidly. We sold Jason's company truck and boat, applying proceeds directly to urgent vendor payments. We eliminated 3 unnecessary management positions held by his friends. We canceled contracts for services providing minimal value. We negotiated payment plans with critical suppliers, prioritizing those essential to production quality. I recruited Sarah Jenkins, a former Sullivan employee who had left during Jason's tenure, to return as operations manager. Her industry expertise and institutional knowledge proved invaluable, and her return signaled to other departed talent that changes were happening. The most challenging conversations were with creditors. I spent days in negotiations, leveraging my financial background to secure workable terms. Several were skeptical, having heard promises from Jason repeatedly. But when they saw our detailed recovery plan backed by my personal investment, most proved willing to work with us. Not everything went smoothly. Some equipment was too far gone and required expensive repairs. Several key client relationships had deteriorated beyond easy repair. The tasting room needed significant renovations after years of neglect. The staff's initial skepticism was palpable. Many had witnessed previous new directions that ultimately changed nothing. I made a point of working alongside them, learning their concerns, and implementing suggestions when practical. Gradual improvements in working conditions and clear communication about our progress slowly rebuilt trust. Jason remained the most volatile element. He alternated between reluctant cooperation and passive resistance. Some days he'd engage positively with visitors in his brand ambassador role, charming them with Sullivan family stories and his genuine passion for winemaking. Other days he'd call in sick or appear distracted and resentful. 6 weeks into the transition, we experienced our first significant victory. Northridge Hotels, a luxury chain that had previously declined Jason's distribution proposal, agreed to a scaled trial of Sullivan wines in their California properties after meeting with our new management team. The following week, a respected wine blog published a cautiously optimistic piece about Sullivan's renewal journey, bringing attention and visitors to our tasting room. These small wins gradually accumulated. Production issues were identified and addressed. Quality control measures were reinstated and strengthened. Financial reporting became transparent and regular. The vineyard itself responded to renewed attention, with the next harvest showing promising early indicators. As the 1-month mark of my arrival approached, the deadline for the critical loan payment that had initiated this chain of events, I gathered my family in the newly organized office to share the status report. "We've made the loan payment on time," I announced, showing the transaction confirmation. "We've negotiated extended terms with our 7 largest creditors. We've reduced monthly operating expenses by 23% without compromising quality. And we've secured 3 new distribution agreements that will improve cash flow starting next quarter." My parents' relief was visible. Even Jason offered a grudging nod of acknowledgement. "We're not out of danger," I cautioned. "Complete recovery will take at least 3 years of disciplined execution. But for the first time in a long while, Sullivan Vineyards has a viable path forward." That evening, as sunset painted the vineyard rose in golden light, I walked the property alone, considering the cost of this intervention. Not just financial, but relational. My relationship with Jason might never fully recover. My parents were navigating their own guilt about enabling the situation. The family dynamics had been permanently altered. Yet watching the land come back to life under proper care brought a different kind of satisfaction than my Chicago achievements ever had. This wasn't just another successful investment strategy. This was preserving a legacy while transforming it, honoring the past while creating a healthier future. Whether the family relationships could heal aloe. 6 months passed in a blur of 14-hour days, difficult decisions, and incremental progress. The transformation of Sullivan Family Vineyards from crisis to stability wasn't a dramatic overnight success story, it was built on thousands of small corrections and consistent accountability. The physical revival of the property provided the most visible evidence of change. Deferred maintenance was systematically addressed. The tasting room underwent a refresh that honored its original warmth while improving functionality. The production facility was reorganized for efficiency. Even the entrance sign was restored, standing straight and freshly painted. Financial indicators confirmed what visitors could see. Monthly cash flow stabilized. Vendor relationships were rebuilt through consistent payments and transparent communication. The consolidated loan arrangement I negotiated reduced interest expenses by almost 40% annually. Wine club memberships, which had declined sharply under Jason's management, began a modest but steady recovery. Most importantly, wine quality showed measurable improvement. The first vintage produced entirely under new management wouldn't be ready for at least 2 years, but our existing inventory underwent rigorous quality control before release. We made the difficult decision to sell off substandard batches in bulk rather than damage our rebuilding reputation, a short-term financial hit that protected long-term brand value. The family dynamics evolved alongside the business. My parents, initially caught between loyalty to Jason and recognition of necessary changes, gradually shifted from reluctant participants to active supporters of the new direction. My father, freed from administrative burdens, reconnected with the agricultural aspects of winemaking that he'd always loved. My mother applied her marketing expertise to our community outreach, rebuilding local relationships damaged during the crisis. "I never realized how much stress I was carrying," she confided during one sunset walk through the vineyard. "Always waiting for the next crisis, making excuses to vendors, wondering how bad things really were." "Why didn't you investigate sooner?" I asked gently. She considered the question carefully. "Fear, I suppose. Fear of confirming our failures as parents and business owners. And maybe fear of confronting Jason when we'd spent so many years accommodating him." My father, overhearing as he joined us, added his perspective. "We convinced ourselves that challenging him would damage his confidence. Instead, we damaged his character by removing consequences." This new parental self-awareness represented significant growth, though it came with its own pain. They were processing not just the near loss of the business but their role in enabling the situation and the impact of their parenting choices on both their children. Jason's journey proved more complex and nonlinear. The first months were marked by resentment and occasional sabotage, forgetting to mention important visitor appointments, providing conflicting information to vendors, undermining my decisions in conversations with our parents. The turning point came unexpectedly. A major wine critic visited without announcement, conducting an incognito tasting. When Jason recognized him despite his attempt at anonymity, he faced a choice: maintain his resentment narrative by providing a mediocre experience, or represent Sullivan Wines with the passion he genuinely felt. To everyone's surprise, especially mine, he chose professional excellence over personal grievance. The resulting positive review specifically mentioned the engaging and knowledgeable family ambassador whose evident passion for Sullivan traditions enhanced the tasting experience. When the review published, I made a point of publicly acknowledging Jason's contribution during our staff meeting. "This is exactly where your talents create real value for Sullivan Vineyards," I told him afterward. "No one can tell our story better than you." Something shifted after that day. While Jason never explicitly acknowledged his previous mismanagement or thanked me for the intervention, his behavior changed. He began showing up consistently, focusing on visitor experiences, and even offering occasional constructive suggestions within his area of responsibility. "He needs his own success story," my mother observed. "Something that's his achievement, not his failure." We began discussing the possibility of Jason developing a small specialty line under the Sullivan umbrella. With clear parameters, dedicated budget, and proper oversight. This project would allow creative expression while maintaining accountability guardrails. By the 6-month mark, my planned sabbatical from my Chicago firm was halfway complete, prompting decisions about longer-term arrangements. The vineyard's progress, while significant, remained fragile. Complete recovery would require at least 2 more years of careful management. "What are you thinking?" my father asked one evening as we reviewed quarterly projections. "About your timeline here?" "I've been exploring options for splitting my time," I explained. "My firm would allow me to work remotely 3 weeks per month if I'm in Chicago 1 week for client meetings. That arrangement could work for the next phase, especially with the management team we've assembled." "And longer term? Will Sullivan always be a part-time project for you?" The question carried no judgment, only genuine curiosity. "I don't know," I admitted. 6 months ago, I would have said this was a temporary rescue mission before returning to my real career. Now I'd rediscovered a connection to the land and family business I thought I'd left behind. Now I'd experienced the satisfaction of rebuilding something tangible rather than simply growing investment portfolios. Now I'd begun healing family relationships I'd assumed were permanently damaged. "This place gets in your blood," my father said, understanding my unfinished thought. "Your grandfather used to say that." "I'm not making any permanent decisions yet," I clarified. "But I'm open to possibilities I wasn't considering before." That evening, we hosted a small gathering to mark the vineyard's progress, not a celebration yet, but an acknowledgement of the distance traveled. Staff members, supportive neighbors, loyal customers, and family attended. Standing among these people who had contributed to the vineyard's survival, I felt a surprising sense of belonging. Jason approached, offering a glass of our grandfather's favorite Sullivan Cabernet. "Truce," he suggested, with a hint of his old charm but less of the manipulative edge. "Truce," I agreed, accepting the glass. "I'm not saying I like having my big sister as my boss," he clarified quickly. "Or that I agree with all your decisions. But, the place is still here. That counts for something." Coming from Jason, this qualified acknowledgement represented significant growth. The next morning, I walked the vineyard rows alone, considering the journey of the past 6 months and the path ahead. The vines were thriving under proper care, new growth emerging from even the most neglected plants. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was apt. Sullivan family vineyards had nearly collapsed under the weight of mismanagement and enabling. Its revival came not just from financial intervention but from fundamental changes in expectations, accountability, and family dynamics. The business was healing, and alongside it, so were we, imperfectly, unevenly, but genuinely. The vineyard would never be the idyllic family enterprise of my childhood memories. Instead, it was evolving into something more complex but potentially more sustainable, a business built on clear-eyed assessment of abilities rather than sentimental assignments of roles, on earned trust rather than assumed loyalty. As I reached the property's edge, overlooking the valley beyond, I reflected on the lessons of our family's journey. True love sometimes means setting boundaries rather than giving unlimited chances. Real support involves accountability, not enablement. And sometimes saving a legacy requires fundamentally changing it. That evening, my parents, Jason, and I shared dinner on the patio overlooking the vineyards. As we raised glasses of Sullivan wine to toast 6 months of progress, I recognized that the work of restoration, both of the business and our family relationships, remained ongoing. But for the first time, I believed both were possible. Have you ever had to make difficult choices to save something you love, even when it meant being the bad guy temporarily? Or maybe you've been caught between family loyalty and necessary accountability? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might be navigating their own complicated family business dynamics. Remember, sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are the ones most necessary for genuine healing. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to make difficult choices when needed in your own journey.